Welcome to Preaching Innovation Lab, a project of the Kerygma Initiative at Palmer Theological Seminary. This is a monthly series of short interviews featuring authors of recent books on preaching. Books we believe can inspire preachers to think afresh about the theory and the practice of preaching. I'm Dr. David Stark, director of the Kerygma Initiative and instructor of Homiletics at Palmer. Today, we are excited to meet with Dr. Richard Voelz. Dr. Voelz is Associate Professor of Preaching and Worship at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. An ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, he has over a decade of ministry experience in various contexts. In 2025, Dr. Voelz also served as president of the Academy of Homiletics. Among other things, he is the author of Preaching to Teach, Inspire People to Think and Act, Tending the Tree of Life, Preaching and Worship Through Reproductive Loss and Adoption, and Youthful Preaching, Strengthening the Relationship Between Youth, Adults, and Preaching. Welcome, Dr. Voelz.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Stark. Good to be here.
It is so good to be here with you today. We are discussing your latest book, From Pulpit to Public Square, Faithful Speech Beyond Church Walls. And I just want to thank you for this timely, thoughtful, and inspiring book. It really was a wonderful read. I wonder if you might say just a little bit about how did you sort of get into this topic? What experiences, what opportunities, needs, or problems led you to explore speaking in the public square?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a question that has kind of multiple layers of answers. So first, I started teaching in the Theological Academy in 2016, which we know is kind of a momentous year in the life of our country, and a lot of different faith leaders coming into public spaces to use their voices in a way that maybe was a little bit less so prior to 2016. And when I came to Union Presbyterian Seminary, the introductory course here for preaching was Introduction to Preaching and Worship, all in one semester. And so it was too much and not enough all at the same time for students. And I had the opportunity to break those two courses apart. And when I broke it apart, I really wanted to reimagine what the preaching intro to preaching course could be, especially since a number of our students are not interested in going into congregational ministries, not interested in preaching week to week. They're want to be in nonprofit sector work or advocacy spaces or chaplaincy. And so I wanted to say, well, how can I teach them to preach? Because they are now people who will be called upon to do so in some ways from time to time. But also, how might preaching inform the work that they do beyond the walls of congregations and congregational worship? And so this led me to kind of puttering around and trying to find some resources. So I wrote the book not because I feel like I'm an expert speaker in the public square, or that I have a long-standing life and practice of activism or nonprofit work in which I'm doing this all the time. Mine's more on the congregational side, but because I really needed a resource. And I was searching around and was giving students, 20 articles or whatever it was within 2 or 3 weeks of class. I needed a resource where I could help them make those connections between what we're doing in preaching and what we're doing in the public square. And so it really arose from a need in the classroom and a contextual need of what I see faith leaders doing and trying to do, and a responsibility that I have to help form them for those tasks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know there's so much more there behind it too. I know you've been involved in you've been humble about your work, but you've been involved in speaking in the public square. And I just really appreciate the way you frame this for us today, and to think about this work that extends far beyond the pulpit, and this calling that extends far beyond the pulpit. I wonder if you might say a little something about how is speaking in the public square different from pulpit speech? What are some skills maybe that preachers need to develop to effectively engage speaking in the public square?
Yeah, I'll start with the differences question because I think it's an important one, and then it leads into the skills question as well. So you think about an obvious difference. There's not a congregational context for worship when we're stepping into the public square. And so there's a whole different set of assumptions about what goes on inside the space for worship and in the context of a liturgy, right, versus what happens outside in the public square. So no congregational context, no liturgical context, which shapes preaching, right? So there's a different kind of shaping force to the speaking moment. There's also a pronounced difference in status or authority or power or relationship to those who have gathered to hear. So the kinds of assumptions that we might make about ourselves in the pulpit, our power, our authority, our relationship to our listeners, in all the best senses of those words, power, authority, and relation, thinking about them well, those do not necessarily hold true in the public square, where we've got a different set of folks who are gathering. Some of them might have deep faith commitments. Some of their faith commitments, if they have them, might be radically different from our own. We might have people in those spaces that have no faith commitments and in fact might be antagonistic toward faith. And our power is different, right? We have a healthy sense of power and authority in the pulpit that people will lend credence to what we're saying, right? In a way that they might not, right? And especially in relationship to, what I call targets in the book, right? Those forces or systems we might be speaking against, right? We have different levels of power in relationship to those. So that's another difference. In preparing to preach a sermon on a Sunday morning, we're going to approach the biblical text most often, and we're going to spend a lot of time with the biblical text doing all the wonderful exegetical things that are in our exegetical toolbox to do. We're going to, invite this deep relationship with a text throughout a week. And that's not what happens in the public square. We don't gather around the biblical text. And we don't exegete texts in the same way, if we do at all. And so we have this different relationship with the Bible in the public square. And that's also to say that we're really driven by particular kinds of situations. They might be emergency situations, crisis situations that are happening in our communities. They might be, well-planned occasions, depending on what we're working toward. But I think those are some of the big differences that I would know. Now, in terms of skills, so connected with some of those things that I've said. So one of the things we've got to be able to do is to be able to read and interpret ourselves and where we stand in the context. And we've got to be able to read the context a little bit differently than we do for congregations. Now, in the book, I use some congregational exegesis tools combined with some advocacy tools that help us shape that interpretive work that we do. So we've got to be able to read ourselves, the power and authority we have, the place we have within the speaking context. We've got to be able to say and acknowledge how our speaking connects to very strategic purposes. So hopefully our speaking will be connected to a larger conversation or a movement or an organizing group or a nonprofit in some way. And we've got to be able to connect what we're doing to be a player and a team member with what's going on. Another skill that I hope folks will develop is what I call faith-rooted language and determining what's appropriate. So, how I use this sort of metaphor, agricultural metaphor, in the book. Sometimes our faith-rooted speech kind of runs underground, and we'll just have some glimmers. And this is appropriate for different contexts of how faithy our language is in the public square. Other times it'll be a little bit more raised up, and other times it'll be what I call flowering. Sort of waving to others and signaling to others, whether that's Bible or Christian theology or signaling that in big ways. And we got to be able to determine what's most appropriate for that. And then, I think when we get down to sort of brass tacks, like what are the rhetorical devices that might help us? What are the kinds of ways that we might use different figures of speech and rhetorical modes that can help our what we say in the public square really stick and really ring in people's ears? Because again, there are similarities with preaching here, particularly here, but there are some differences, right? And we want to speak in a way that gets heard by the most people possible.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And let me just add one line here to our viewers, that one of the things I really appreciate about this book is not just the way you framed it as you've laid out for us, but that really each chapter also gives some very concrete, practical exercises and tools to develop these skills.
Yeah.
I just, especially in this season, I mean, that's part of the timeliness of this book as I think about the work that many of us are being called into, who may or may not have had that much experience speaking in the public square, to have these practical tools and this deeper theoretical, theological framework is just really a fantastic resource. So thank you so much for that, Rich.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, on the one hand, it's a textbook, right? And I want it to be helpful for those who are getting ready for this work. And I wanted it to be a way that folks who are more experienced can go back and analyze some of their work as well, and refine their tools and see what's worked for them, what might add to their practices. So yeah, I appreciate you lifting that up. The exercises in the end of each chapter are really important, and I wanted it to be a very practical book in addition to the frameworks that you've raised and lifted up.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. I already have slotted to use a few of these with some of my own students, and I have been using them myself too. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
You mentioned this already about the relatedness, the connectedness of speaking in the public square to preaching. But I wonder if you might just say a little bit more. The book is, of course, about speech in the public square. A lot of our viewers are clergy, and so I'd love for you just to say a little bit about the way that this book and this work sort of connects to preaching. And I'll just note here that there's a ton of excellent homiletic advice that you have in this book on speaking, not in the pulpit, but in the public square. So how might engaging, maybe I can frame it this way.
Yeah.
How might engaging the public square also help us as clergy to be better preachers in the pulpit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I noted as I started to talk about the development of the book and the genesis of the book is that I hope that it would be an outgrowth, right? And the way that it's actually framed in my introductory syllabus is that we take these practices and we move them right into the public square, not untouched, but I think we there are practices that we can take from what we do each and every week, right? You notice the work in the book around the theological claim and the central question, the central claim, and central purpose. Like those are tools I get from our colleague Leah Shade in her introductory textbook, and they're not foreign, right, to preaching, and I think they can be helpful, right? There's often sort of like some slander against transferable practices, right? But there's more heft to what I'm doing than just say, these are the practices, now take them here. So that's one thing. I wanted that to be a street that moves that way. But I think I think where we're finding ourselves now is that we're seeing a two-way street, right? So you take somebody's book like Chelsea Yarborough and her book on Black women's proclamation practices, where she takes these women who are not church preachers, right, but who are engaging in proclamatory practice, and she's moving their practices into the church. So what I think I'm doing is I'm participating, and Chelsea and I, Dr. Yarborough and I had not like really talked about this, but I think what we're doing is doing some similar things and saying like, well, this is a two-way street and we can learn from each other about how the pulpit can move into the public square in ways that are appropriate, but also how public square preaching or proclamation can move its way into the ecclesial spaces. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think that's part of what sort of the larger framework is getting at.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Rich, for offering your time and wisdom today. It was really a joy to talk with you. Viewers, if like me, you wish we had more time with Dr. Voelz, let me encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, From Pulpit to Public Square, Faithful Speech Beyond Church Walls. Thank you again, Dr. Voelz.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Preaching Innovation Lab. We hope today's conversation sparked new ideas and fresh energy for your preaching ministry. Until next time, grace and peace.